Hey everybody, Jason here. Welcome to my knot channel. In this video, we're going to look at the poacher's knot. The poacher's knot is a knot in the category of knots known as hitch knots. Animated Knots by Grog describes the poacher's knot as a very secure loop knot and has it also in the category of knots as end loops. And although Animated Knots is a good resource, a good reference to use, I have to point out that this information is incorrect. I'm going to show you how the poacher's knot is tied and how it's used, but first let me clarify this point. So loop knots, by definition, are knots which form a fixed, non-adjustable loop in a rope. They don't change shape when they're removed from an object. A good example of a loop knot is the common bowline. You can see how with the common bowline, I can pull on the loop and it doesn't change shape. It's non-adjustable. In comparison, a hitch knot, like the poacher's knot, is adjustable. Hitch knots are knots that are used to attach a rope to a ring, a rail, a post, or in some cases, another rope. There are three different types of hitch knots. There are friction hitches, which sometimes are called slide and grip hitches. There are common hitches, and there are also quick release hitches. Many hitch knots form adjustable loops, which change shape when they're pulled on or when you remove them from an object. To provide another reference, you can find the poacher's knot in the Ashley Book of Knots as knot number 409 on page 65. The poacher's knot is also sometimes known as a double overhand noose and also a strangle snare. You can see when looking at the poacher's knot that the foundation is a double overhand knot. The double overhand knot on its own is a stopper knot. And if you don't remember, a stopper knot is a knot that is typically used at the end of a rope to prevent a rope from fraying or to prevent a rope from passing through a hole or a device. Another very similar knot that we can compare is also found in the Ashley Book of Knots, and it's the strangle knot. The strangle knot is, in fact, simply a double overhand knot, except this time it's tied around an object or multiple objects to hold them together. And so the category becomes a binding knot. Now, while we're talking about the Ashley Book of Knots, Ashley describes the poacher's knot as a knot used to snare small animals. Now, there is a specific way to tie the poacher's knot to use it as an animal snare, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But first, let's start off by learning how to tie the common poacher's knot. First, create a bite at the end of your rope. From there, make 2 full wraps around the bite, and then take your working end and pass it down through those wraps. And from here, cinch up your knot. It's important when you're tying the poacher's knot that you make those full 2 wraps. If you don't, and you only make 1 wrap, then you'll only tie the common noose, which is less secure of a knot. You can find the poacher's knot being used in a lot of different applications by arborists, in camping, in climbing, boating and sailing, by hunters, and for home and garden uses. Practically anywhere you need an easy to tie but secure hitch knot. As I mentioned a moment ago, the Ashley Book of Knots mentions that the poacher's knot is used to snare small animals. It is, however, it requires a slightly modified way of tying it. So let me show you. This time, we will essentially tie the knot using the same manner, except this time, when finished, we're going to pass the standing end through our loop before nearly cinching up against it. You want it snug, but not tight. When we tie the poacher's knot in this manner, we create a sort of double hitch, or possibly even a friction hitch, and the shape of our loop is much more rounded and it's easier to place. You can see if I tie a poacher's knot on its own, the shape of the loop has a teardrop shape, pointed at the top. But if I use the poacher's knot to create a double hitch or friction hitch, then my loop is much more rounded, and as I mentioned, it's easier to place. Normally, we'd try to avoid running the long length of a standing rope through the knot, but in this case of a snare, the standing line will only be a few feet long, so it's easily managed. There are a couple dangers with the poacher's knot. The first is that it can become very difficult to untie, depending on what type of rope you use, and also how tight it's cinched up, and also possibly if it's undergone some shock or been heavily loaded. The other danger is that we are creating a noose, so you should never place the poacher's knot around a part of a body. So the poacher's knot is a relatively secure hitch knot, but if you're looking for a simpler knot with a little bit more security, then I recommend the scaffold knot. The scaffold knot is tied exactly the same way, except that you add an additional wrap. 3 wraps instead of 2. And if you're interested in learning more knots, then I invite you to come check out the Knot School. Knot School is the only dedicated private learning platform for learning knots, with a fraternity of knot tiers sharing their experiences and knowledge. I'll put a link in the description and also as a pinned comment under this video. Thanks for watching.